My father taught me to work. He did not teach me to love it. Abraham Lincoln. Welcome to the Guyana Dialogue. I'm your hostess, Shamiza Ali. Good evening to everyone joining us on Facebook and on YouTube. I hope everyone is enjoying quality time with their family and loved ones, especially our kids that are on their summer break. Tonight, our discussion will be an update on labor relations, state of wages, technical training, and job creation. The Guyana Dialogue is being sponsored by a coordinating council of Guyanese based in the US, UK, Canada, Guyana, and the Caribbean. Funding support is by well-known philanthropist Dave Narayan from Dave West Indian Imports. Joining me tonight is Dr. Tara. Welcome to the show, Dr. Tara.
Thank you very much.
And my next speaker for the night is Dr. Daz. Welcome to the show, Dr. Daz.
Thank you, host Shamisa. Thank you very much.
Pleasure having both of you gentlemen this evening. He is Guyana's ambassador to Washington. He served as Guyana's president and prime minister. He is an engineer by profession and hails from London. Please welcome His Excellency Sam Hinds.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tara Singh, and may I say, extend greetings to all of the viewers in the UK, in North America, maybe even in Guyana, wherever Guyanese are all around the world. Well, I think we should start from the realization that Guyana is more or less a man-made country in that our different peoples were brought together relatively recently, maybe starting 300 years ago. We had, before that, we had the Amerindians in Guyana, and then we had the European adventurers coming in as they were expanding, as they were exploring and investigating and expanding and looking for opportunities. We had, in particular in Guyana, mostly the English and the Dutch and the French. And then as they set up estates and they needed workers on their estates, they brought in slaves from Africa. And then we know that when slavery was abolished in 1834, when it was announced, in 1836 already there were some Portuguese people being brought in from the Madeira Islands. And then in 1838, people were brought in from India as they were being taken to many places around the world. And I think in 1852, we had some people from China be coming in to provide laborers on the sugar estates. So we're largely a country that is in the making. I say this because people speak of us, our country, as being a divided country, and I say that's not a good image. Our country is one of six peoples coming together. And I would say we've covered quite a lot of distance already, but we still have some more distance to cover. Many of the commentators say that in societies such as ours, there will always be people from all groups who may be who think that they should have greater entitlements. And particularly, there is no hiding the fact that our Afro-Guyanese group has felt that they should be greatly entitled because they were the first people to make the coastland habitable, dig the first set of canals by hand and shovel, and set up their estates and so on. And then later on, after slavery was abolished, they worked with the Europeans. They were discriminated against by the Europeans, and that they felt that when the British were leaving, that it was natural for them to follow the British and go into government. This has many people who recognize that this is a feeling of entitlement. And it is the general feeling, a white feeling, that when combined in the 50s with the issues of the charges of communism and all of that made against Dr. Chetty Jagan and the People's Progressive, when all those things were put together, most people would recognize and admit that the first rigged election in 1968 had at least tacit and in many cases active approval by many, many people, including nearly all the Christian churches in Guyana and so on. There was the feeling that a little bit of wrong was being done to avoid a greater wrong or a greater catastrophe in Guyana. And that is a background that we in the People's Progressive Party have been working against. And I would say Dr. Jagan, in all his actions, was always aware of this. He was always aware that positive actions, affirmative action would be needed to build our country, to bring our people together as one people. And with that awareness, from the time the People's Progressive Party was set up, the preceding one, the PAC, in 1946, I think. It was a group of four of Chetty and Janet Ashton Chase, who is still alive, the only one still alive, and Mr. Hubbard, who was a mulatto, which was a significant group in those times. And then when the PPP was founded formally, he invited Mr. Forbes Burnham to come and take the position of chairman, which was being intended at that time. It was intended that Ashton Chase would have been the chairman, but he invited this new young lawyer from Guyana. So Dr. Jagan always realized that effort would be required, affirmative action would be required to bring our six peoples together, peoples who came from different parts of the world with their complete different system of language, culture, religion, and so on. You had to work to bring them together. And he set out on that, and he was consistently so. And I would say that many people sometimes say that he was weak and didn't lack courage for not maybe going to violent action during at least the 68 to 92 period, when everyone was aware that the elections were rigged during that period. But I think it just shows for me his commitment, his recognition that a lot of work is required to build our country, to bring our people together, and he was ready to do that more or less with the sacrificing of his life, some 28 years, when he was basically, as they sometimes say, been pushed to the wilderness, out in the wilderness. And in my case in particular, as I'm an example, as it appeared that we would have fair and free elections again in 92, he again reached out and brought in many people, once they were not hostile to the PPP, to come and work with them, including myself. So I think that's a background we should act from. And then moving forward to many of the arguments about discrimination. The arguments are things I think that the PNC, and largely supported by many Afro-Guyanese, but I would say even now some Indo-Guyanese may find it useful to them to join in with those arguments, and many of them, and some of them too, do not really understand or don't want to understand the situation, and also join in these accusations of the PPP civic discriminating. But if you look to the facts, we had at the beginning those questions coming up with our housing program, and we, I think, had maybe 75,000 or so housing units granted, well, at least the land granted, and got the housings going with the streets and so on during our period from 92 to 2015. And initially, there were the complaints that we were discriminating, but they faded away because it was not so. And our method, our method of people patiently putting hands in a box, a kind of a lottery system, to get the order in which you are satisfied and the location of the lots you got. I think that issue has gone, but it was a big issue. I would point to our education program, where we basically choose to provide initially, I think, $5,000, $10,000 Ghana dollars to every child going to the public school system, 170,000 or so. When the coalition was in office in 2015 to 2020, they stopped that. And instead, they seem to provide a program of bikes, boats, and buses. But this was prime for discrimination and influence. It was prime. That was prime for discrimination and influence. So I think that these accusations and allegations come about because inevitably groups in our situation in Guyana, a formative situation, forming a nation from 6 different groupings, initially at least 6 different groupings, is prone to people comparing their individual and group positions. And it's prone to feelings of privileges and entitlements. And that is a motivation. But I think that it is losing its hold. It's losing its hold, and we must not give it too much attention and overreact to it. Neither should we ignore it. We have to find the right path along which we travel. And I think our current government under President Irfan Ali is finding a good path forward. I was particularly heartened by his day of fasting and praying, and on which he raised the slogan, "One Guyana," and also called on us all to lift each other up. We do have a challenge going forward from here with oil, in that this process generally, even if we were all one people in terms of race and religion and everything, even if we were all one people in Guyana, this oil find and development of oil could be very disruptive, and it would tend to extend ranges of income and so on. It would be very disruptive, even if we were all one people. And in our situation, where we are still 6 groups coming together, much closer than we ever were, but still having some distance to close still, it is a very challenging situation. But I think our president and government are very much aware of it. I think the cabinet that we had, in its makeup and its activities, is well addressing it, and I am very hopeful that slowly but steadily, those ideas will wither away. Those fears, those insecurities that are natural, that they will wither away.
You know, Ambassador, there has often been comparison about income levels between the various ethnic groups. There was a study done, I think it was in 2007, but a more recent study was not done in this area, look at income disparities among the various groups. And what they found that the income disparity in Guyana was not too much different from that in Barbados or Trinidad and Tobago, although Trinidad and Barbados had a better distribution, but not significantly different from Guyana. Furthermore, there was a study also done on poverty levels among the ethnic groups, and they found that Afro-Guyanese had a poverty level of 31%, and Indo-Guyanese had a poverty level of 30%, whereas the Amerindians had a poverty level of over 70%. So
Yes.
that is, I think that when people get to understand these figures and these data, that can help them to think about these problems differently. It's true that certain ethnic groups like Indians and probably Portuguese and Chinese have businesses, etc. And people may be comparing those with
Thinking
other level. You see, what people are doing, they're using the private sector income and the houses of people build and comparing to those people who work in the public sector and their income. So I don't know how that will be resolved, but I just want to mention this quickly to pass Archer to comment on this. But the education program, where they're giving out over 5,000 online scholarships, and there's a guy who did a study of this, and they found about 38% were allocated to Afro-Guyanese, about 40% to Indo-Guyanese, and the rest to others. So there was some bickering about that, but then when the guy did the analysis and produced the data, it quieted down. Then the government also recently allocated about 10,000 part-time jobs across all regions.
Yes.
So these are the data we need to get out to people so they can better understanding. Now, no one supports discrimination. I hope that nobody in the government, the policy making, can support this.
No.
But
No, not at all.
comment.
Not at all. We are relatively small in numbers when you think of it, 800,000 onshore in Guyana and maybe 800,000 abroad, mostly in North America. We have to have every Guyanese working together, and as the president called on us to work to lift up each other. We're coming together from different positions. And I think that over time, as in the past, we're becoming more and more one people. There were earlier times, maybe when I was young, 70 years ago, when I remember my grandmother, who was teaching at a Canadian mission school, trying to encourage some children at that school who were mostly Indo-Guyanese to go into public servant jobs, to go into nursing, and so on. So I think we come with our different sets of traditions, and slowly but steadily we're making one country. Numbers like you just gave, we need to put that out. We need to recognize this is a matter that has both a logical issue of the head, but it also has an emotional issue.
Yeah.
Heart. And over time, I think it would be answered. So as I said there, we must not overestimate the racial issues in Guyana, but neither must we underestimate it. We just keep going, doing the right thing as best we can, and I think in time it will disappear.
All right, that's fine. We just have a few minutes, so if you can spend the last 2 minutes to make your final comments on race, the state of race relations in Guyana, and any relevant remark they want to make.
Let me say too, that there are always differences in places. In fact, in the last couple of days, in talking with my fellow ambassadors from CARICOM countries and so on, I recognize that even though many of them, most of them are nearly all Afro descendants, but I found the the intensity of relationships between the different parties, it seems to be just as much as in ours. We can think in terms of Jamaica, where there's very great heat between the different parties, and they're both mainly Afro-descended people. But it is so easy to think of yourself in terms of a ethnic group because of our physiological differences, and to think of it so in fact, the same thing can be interpreted both ways. For example, I remember sometimes when you do something, say in an Afro area, say the PPP does something in its programs for everybody, in development in an area, a village that is largely Afro, you might hear a response, you're doing it only because we're Afro and you're trying to catch us, but you're not going to be able to catch, you can't buy us out or something like that. And you could hear comments, it can always, whichever way it is, it could be interpreted in terms of race. But my hope is that people will do that, but after a while they see that that is not it, that it's development that we're on, a program of development for everybody and all across Guyana. And I think over time it will dissipate, get less and less. It may never go to zero, but it will get less and less.
Thank you very much, His Excellency Sam Hinds, Guyana Ambassador to Washington, former President of Guyana and former Prime Minister. We thank you very much. We'll have you for a much longer program. In another couple of weeks, I'll reach out to you and set a time and schedule. So we thank you very much, and you have a pleasant day. I know you're very busy, and we thank you for accommodating us at this short notice.
Thank you very much, Dr. Singh. Thank you. Bye-bye. Cheers.
Tonight, our guest for the night is a true son of Guyana's soil. He was born at Bedford-Wachting, East Coast, Demerara, raised by his grandparents, and he has been married for 42 years and is the father of 4 sons and grandfather to many. Mr. Hamilton was a little country boy with an extraordinary dream to serve his country. The dream of serving his country became a reality after he graduated from the Moore School of Business in Hartford, Connecticut, in the USA, in information technology. Between the years 1990 to 1994, he served as a supervisor and later elevated to manager as an IT specialist at the Guyana Elections Commission. However, in 1998, he joined the National Assembly as a member. During the years 2011 to 2015, Mr. Hamilton served as a parliamentary secretary. Today, he is once again representing the people as a member of the National Assembly in the capacity of Guyana's Labor Minister. He is a true stalwart and public servant to the nation of Guyana and lives by the mantra, "Don't complain." Please welcome the Honorable Joseph Hamilton. Welcome to the show, Minister Hamilton. It's a pleasure to have you here this evening.
There's no voice.
Yes, I did some technical things here. That is, you're hearing me now?
Yeah, we are hearing you now.
Okay, I accidentally turned off the button here on my But I was saying that I'm hopeful that by the time we're finished, people both in Guyana and out of Guyana will have a fair understanding as to what the government program regarding labor and labor relations is, and secondly, what we have done in the last 2 years after we reestablished a Ministry of Labor.
Okay. I want to start, Minister, by saying I'm acquainted with the mission of your ministry. First, it was a department under the previous government, and when the PP came into power, they made it into a full-fledged ministry. It was like that between 2011 to 2014 as well. That is very commendable that you upgrade this. Labor is very important in any development, especially given the rapid technological and economic changes that will take place. the mission of your organization is capacity building, human development, and protection of workers' rights. So I want to begin by asking you a question. I look at a program on Monday and I saw the former Minister of Finance taking credit for increasing the minimum wage from whatever it was. I think he gave a figure like about 30 something to 70 or 60,000. But my reading and following your work at the ministry, you had sent out an order saying that you have increased it by 36% from 44,200 to 60,000. So if you want to comment on that, let's get that clear.
I don't know what the Minister of Finance, former Minister of Finance, Jordan, is talking about or was talking about. And the point is, you know, I am at this stage where I don't pay much attention to those people because truth is a foreign language to those gentlemen and ladies. And so I don't know what $70,000 he's talking about.
Mhm.
The national minimum wage first was raised by Nanda Gopal when he was minister. During APNU time, they moved it from, I think, $36,000 or $37,000 to $44,000 plus, less than $45,000.
Right.
So in the last period of their government, that is what happened. And we have moved it now from 45,000 to 60,000 or thereabout. So I don't know what he is talking about. And so the minimum wage, the national minimum wage, is $60,000. And that order, I signed it.
Right.
The first comment on the matter was done by the President, Irfan Ali, at the Enmore Martyrs observance. Those are the facts of the matter.
Yeah.
So I don't know what Mr. Jordan, where is the national minimum wage? And the thing is so ludicrous and stupid. If the national minimum wage already was $70,000, how come we were having a discussion with the private sector and the labor unions about raising it to 60?
Right.
So it's a total nonsense.
Yeah, we have. Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Now there was another interesting advertisement in the press last week where a hotel was advertising for workers of a specific ethnic category, and you jumped into it and stopped it. If you want to comment on that as well.
No, the thing is, Dr. Singh is this, you know, and Dr. Das and the host, Shelisa Ali. Let me say this. The government of Irfan Ali, we work every day, every hour, and therefore, I don't have to be at my office to deal with labor relations matter. And that is the fundamental issue here. I give you an example of one Sunday I'm at home, and the same entity in question that you spoke to, and I'll get to this advertisement in a moment. They had a gentleman from Greece here, who they brought here as a manager, and they had him, and they didn't pay him for 2 years. They had him in some building somewhere. And they sought to deport him. Imagine that. So that they will not be paying him. And that got to me on a Sunday. And I summoned the chief labor officer. And at the same time, I called a commissioner, Ingston. He wasn't commissioner then. He was in charge of operations, deputy commissioner. And I said, this is a situation, because the first thing, the company cannot deport any citizen, any person. That's only the immigration department that comes under the police could deport. And the second issue was the labor relations issue, owing the man thousands of dollars. long and short of all of that, in a matter of days, because of my intervention, this matter was resolved. I would say this further, that the parent company in Greece, not in Greece, in Turkey, saw this issue. And my information is that they removed the management who was taking this gentleman through this travail. Now, it's total presumptuousness, and secondly, breaking the law. And one of my colleagues shared that with me last week, this advertisement, and in a matter of hours, the chief labor officer, at my instance, called the company, and they pulled the ads down. And I say this to them, that they were breaking the law. I would say this, another company I saw the other day issuing an advertisement talking about able-bodied persons. If you have an advertisement that says you only cater for able-bodied persons, right away you're discriminating against persons who are differently abled. So that is breaking the law. You cannot say, okay, we would only employ Brazilians or we would only employ Latin-speaking persons. You're breaking the law. And so the company pulled the hat down. I'm told they have a new ad out where they expunge those matters. But we will continue to look out for those things. And very shortly, we will issue a notice dealing with those matters, so that people will not find themselves in that position.
Companies who break the labor laws, are there penalties?
Yes, there are penalties. I should say to you right now. Right now, we have about 400 cases in the court dealing with companies, primarily in the security sector, sector. But yes, we take people to court. We negotiate on behalf of workers. And last year, we recouped 38 point something million for workers that were owed by their employers or former employers. This year, we have already recouped nearly $14 million. So that is the fundamental issue. But as regards penalties, and you spoke to that specifically, the penalties today are minimal. We have recommendations to increase fines and penalties that will deter persons from breaking the law and taking advantage on workers. We have with the Attorney General, we have shared those recommendations as regards amendment of labor laws and updating. And what we have set up is a legal committee jointly with the Attorney General Chambers and the Ministry of Labor to review those legislation that we want to change and we want to amend and we want to add. And after that is finished, the intention is to have public consultations on the new proposals changing the law. I would say this, the penalties are substantially increased in the new proposals, because right now the penalties are no deterrent to a person who wants to break the law. So we have substantial penalties will come for persons who want to break the law, who think that they can take advantage on citizens. And if you follow what we have been doing, what I've been doing, many matters, I personally attend to them, so that no one who think that because they have money, they could make rings around labor officers and they could seek to deny people their benefits. I go it myself, and I have several instances where I intervened and they corrected themselves regarding overtime payments, where you have had companies that were working people 12 hours a day and they weren't paying overtime. You had companies who were giving working people overtime and they give them a one-off payment. All of those things are breaking the law. Both Guyanese companies and expatriate companies. Now all of that has been corrected. They pay overtime because the law says after 8 hours in a day, you have to pay overtime to the employee rather. What some companies were willfully doing is that they deliberately interpret the law to say the person, they have to work 40 hours per week before they're entitled to overtime. The thing is, a person can work 36 hours a week. They will never reach the 40 hours. But they work 3 days at 12 hours. Automatically, you owe them 12 hours overtime pay, even though they didn't reach the 40 hours. So a lot of those things under the previous government, I give you one example, one vulgarity that the public must know about. The manganese company in Region 1, in my interaction with the staff in the early days, they said that the former government deliberately allowed what was happening there. And secondly, they deliberately allowed non-remittance of taxes so that the workers can go home with more money. I mean, that is what. So the workers were working 12 hours a day. And they had this collusion between management and workers that they will not remit taxes to the. So they were breaking not just labor laws, they were breaking the laws that govern taxation, which I think, as I understand, is a criminal offense. So you have had those things. They have been corrected, and we look forward to a better labor relations and, as you indicated, protection of the rights of workers.
Yeah. Now that you have mentioned the manganese company, I want to ask you about the Kwakwani, the Rusal closed down. Is there any hope that that bauxite facility could be reopened?
Well, up to before the Russians invaded Ukraine, there was some hope, because Rusal had started a conversation with my ministerial colleague, Natural Resources, about wanting to come back. Now you know that most of the people who they call oligarchs, who are the shareholders of Rusal, they're blacklisted and they're under sanction. So that is a matter that has been put to rest because of the sanctions and because of the invasion.
They still have legal title to the holdings there, or the government can transfer the title to another company that may be interested?
Well, I would want to believe they still have legal title. What I know, if I remember some weeks ago, I think the Minister of Natural Resources spoke to the matter, and I think he made a point that the bauxite operations in the Berbice River will be reopened. So I suspect that at his level, in his sector, he might be having some conversations with some set of persons who have an interest in opening back the bauxite company in the Berbice River.
Yeah, I asked you this question because I worry about the workers who are laid off, running into, I believe, over 2 years now without employment. I don't know if they get any benefits or what, or they have been re-employed elsewhere.
Well, what I know is many of them are in mining, and talking about gold mining, and they have sought other employment. Well, let me say this, and I normally say this to the people in Region 10 and in Linden. The mistake that people in Region 10 they're making, and people in Linden, is that psychologically they still believe that Linden is a bauxite town and Region 10 is a bauxite region. That is not so. And therefore, they have to recognize that. And they have to think about industry. They have to think about large-scale farming. They have to think about tourism. There are many other sectors that can be lucrative sectors. Forestry. I would say this, that one of the sectors that contribute financially to Region 10 is the forestry sector at all different levels. Many of the persons, co-op societies you have there, they have large expanses of land given to them since when now Vice President was President, Jack Dale. So forestry is, I would say, the sector that is making a great contribution to Region 10, whether in the Demerara River or the Berbice River.
I want to go back to industrial relations. You know, the PP was very much forceful in passing the Industrial Relation Act. In 1953, they did that, and one day afterwards, they were thrown out of power. Then they tried to gain early 60, well, either 63 or 64 industrial, and there was widespread mayhem, etc. That didn't go through. But eventually, I think that they managed to get Industrial Relations Act passing through. Tell me if I'm right. I was told that most of the modern improvements to labor laws have been enacted during the PP term in office. Is that correct? Or?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
But I would say this, I will go further to say this. And we were just speaking about additions to the law, development of the law, amendments to the law. We are developing a very modern society. And we have to pay attention seriously to labor laws and labor relations. I give you a couple of instances to make my point. I have said this to labor leaders personally, and I've said it publicly. And they chastised me for the comments that I made some time ago. The failure of proper representation of workers is because most, if not all, of the leaders, trade union leaders, they're fossilized. They are not in tune with the new realities of labor relations. First point, all the collective labor agreements I have reviewed, a pillar of labor relations is not fundamental in there. All of them spoke only to wages and salaries. The issue is, what about safety and health? I am arguing the case that all collective labor agreement must have fundamentally stated the issue of a worker's safety and health. Because you might be able to argue the case for the man to receive $5,000 a day. If he dies next week, what have you accomplished for him? So, properly, the argument about labor relations and protection of workers, it must be twinned with the issue about salaries and those things, and also the safety and health of workers. That's the first point. The second issue is this. The world is changing and has changed, and the labor unions are yet to recognize that the new employees, after our generation, Dr. Singh, they don't see themselves working 30 and 40 years any place. And that is, they're more nimble, they're mobile, they change profession within their work life. And so many of them opt for contracts. They want to be a contracted employee, a 1-year contract or 3 years contract. And the labor unions, they argue this case because they believe all public employees, must be fixed establishment employees. The people don't want to be fixed establishment employees. I, as Parliamentary Secretary of the Ministry of Health, I dealt with hundreds of doctors who normally would come to me and say, Minister, my next gratuity, I will do my foundation, or I will purchase my car, or I will buy my windows. So they see it as cheap money for economic development now. And so the unions, they're arguing the case that all workers, public sector workers, should be fixed establishment. And secondly, they say that we, that is the PUP Civic, deliberately give people contract so as to weaken the union representation. Nothing is stopping them from going to the contract employees and seek to represent them, because I think they should have representation. Whether you're fixed establishment or contract employment, you must have representation. So I'm showing you how the labor landscape is changing. But the unions, the representatives, they're not understanding the landscape is not 1940 and 50 and 60 and 70s and 80s. It is a modern landscape. Young people who are different, young professionals whose thoughts are different on these matters.
All right, thank you. I want to pass on the questioning to Dr. Ganga Ramdas. I don't know if you know him, but he was a former head of the Department of Economics and International Relations at Lincoln University, Pennsylvania. He also, prior to that, he had worked at the Bank of Guyana in charge of all the desks down there. He's an econometrician of great repute, and we are very happy to have him here. So over to you, Dr. Ganga. What questions do you have for the Honorable Minister?
Oh, I'm happy that Minister is looking at the industrial environment and the future. And one of the challenges that the future will face is how we convert an adversarial environment into a cooperative environment. And this is where, as he has focused on the law, that is very important. So you have labor, you have management, and you have the law. Now, when it comes to the law, that involves government. But government should also be perceived as a silent partner. And then in an extreme case, government could also intervene as putting the extra weight to solve industrial relations problem. So I think this would be a future challenge where the role of government has to be clearly perceived while we leave the other parties, labor and management, to reach a balancing point at some stage, and look especially at real wages. So after they hit the balance there and they reach, let's say, a stalemate, then government could nudge the parties to make some settlement. So that would mean that you're looking at the national interest instead of the two parties' internal interest. When that is so, I think the outcome would be superior. So you would have labor management and the extra weight that you put into the deal that would transform a non-cooperative situation into a cooperative one. So I think that's the future. But I'm happy that the minister is focusing on the inadequacies of the law currently as it stands, and identifying the areas in which we could have reform. So those would be my overall comments. The only other thing I would add to the benefits part, as you saw in the butter factory case recently, the benefits or the non-monetary benefits, lunch and so forth, they need to be a little more aggressive with that. And as you mentioned, health benefits, I think the butter factory folks had education as well. But that whole package there, that's where the balancing of the industrial relations scene and the conversion from non-cooperative to cooperative would apply through the benefits package, because that would make the workers happier. In the more recent UG case, the customers are also important. They're part of the deal. So the end result should have happy customers. The students and the student rights are also important. And we need to examine the industrial relations processes and the resulting collective bargaining agreement and how that features in the customer satisfaction part. So at some point, that would be a challenge. And for normalization and for cooperative solutions, we need to look at the wider consumer and the student part in the UG case and how that applies to the overall industrial relations agreement. So those would be my comments. The benefits, another point there, it should be transferable.
Dr. Das, many of the things you spoke to, let me pick up from that. Look, the important issue of partnership and not adversarial relationship. So that's the first point. And I say this to you, in less than 2 years, the re-established Ministry of Labor, we were able to have contesting parties, unions, and management. Some of them had an outstanding contestation over 5 years, 7 years. And we are happy to report that we were able to have them sit down. And in the less than 2 years, we have had 12 collective labor agreements signed with persons who were adversaries under the last government. In one instance, the company refused to sit down at the same table with the union representative. But if you follow what is happening, 12 or thereabouts collective labor agreement already are signed under my watch. Because the same point you're raising, I sit with the union representative, I sit with the management. In one instance, I said to both parties, both of y'all are saying that you have the workers' interest at heart. You're saying you could only pay 5%. The labor unions are saying they want 9%. Why not end in the middle at 7% and somebody lose 2 so, somebody lose 2 so? So, and that, I'm telling you, when they reflected, a couple of months after, they had a collective labor agreement signed. Moving from an adversarial, non-negotiable position to recognizing that if you care about the workers, we have to move on. The second and important thing, the CLA that was signed a couple months ago between GT&T and the Postal and Telecommunication Workers Union includes benefit of educational development. And that is the progressive nature of the CLA you're talking about, Dr. Das, where it speaks to training of technical staff. And secondly, it went on to say, once technical people in these areas, they receive this type of training and they're certified, their salaries will be increased gradually from year to year. So labor relations is more than arguing for what salary and wages the person should get. it should be holistically, as I said earlier, the important twin to salary and benefit is health and safety of the worker. Every CLA should have enshrined in there. These conditions that people work under must be safe conditions. And of course, other benefits that you spoke to, issues that have to do with education, as like the CLA with GT&T, and I would say, complements the GT&T, because that's a model collective labor agreement that other companies can follow on. So you're right that to build this nation, we cannot have adversarial relationship. And we have tried our best. The chief labor officer, he has tried his best. I could tell you, I have tried my best. And if you follow, except for the unnecessary skirmishes you had with the teachers' union, the labor front has been very quiet. It has not been so rambunctious in the last 2 years. And that is because of a different strategy, different model of managing the labor sector, interventions, respect, and ensuring people do the best for the workers. And we have to continue doing more of that.
May I make a comment on two other things? And the first is, we must not make any mistake with calculating the real wage, which means that we must have accurate and timely cost of living indices, and also broken down by commodities, so that the president, if he wants to open his mullah, he would have the opportunity to do that, to balance the scales. But the real wage is very, very important. We cannot afford to have a mistake, because those at the low end of the wage spectrum there, they depend on wages to cover meals and transportation and so forth, to go every day to work and return home to their families. So if we perceive that the union or the management is making a mistake, I think it would be appropriate for government to intervene and give them a nudge and say, look, it should be a little higher. I saw the 7% at the butter factory, but I will not comment on that. Or the other thing is, on the part of the employers, they need to have employee development programs. Let me just show you this cover of this this here. I don't know if you could see it. This is Pinkleton, Australia. My cousin is in charge of an Australian program that deals with the different aspects, both of the industrial relations area and also the welfare of the employees. So employee development programs should be also private sector initiatives. It shouldn't be just the government. So I would like more responsibility to be placed on farms, the companies and so on, to have these employee development programs in-house. That would create a more conducive environment for both the worker and management, and put off some pressure off government, so government can just monitor data and fairness and in the industrial relations scene.
What I will say though, many of the private sector companies, they have educational development programs. I know that for sure. One of the issues you have that now the private sector is having this conversation with me that goes like this, about how do they protect their interests, how do they protect themselves, how do they protect their finances. The fact that as they train people, they move on to some other place. And a lot of private sector companies, local, they have lost people by the dozens and scores to companies that are involved in oil and gas. So the private sector have their own issues regarding that matter, about training and retraining and development of persons. But I look at it this way: the fact that the person continue to serve the country, I don't see it as a loss, and that is what I say to them. I don't see it as a loss.
I think,
I,
yeah,
I see it as contribution to the development of the state. And what we have to do, both public sector and private sector, we have to continue to train people and retrain people.
yes, the public sector has a definite role there. I could see that. And that would also inform the wage differentials between the government sector and the private sector. If the government sector looks at itself and say, you know what, we can initiate the training needed for all the other sectors, and so we will be a stepping stone over to the private sector. It has to be deliberate, and the government should be the platform to train as well, so that government knows that there is going to be mobility within the civil service, within the public sector, and that these people would move on to higher grounds, as you mentioned. That should be a deliberate strategic policy that
Well, I would say this, Dr. Das, we have a deliberate strategic policy in the technical areas. And we, the Board of Industrial Training that comes under the Ministry of Labor, as I speak to you, we have launched a project within the training programs to deal with 6 or 7 specific skills areas in Region 2, 5, 6, and 10. I just, this afternoon, returned from Region 10. I spent 3 days there, where we launched program to train over 200 persons in skills that are needed: building construction, welding and fabrication, mechanics, AC and refrigeration technician, plumbers. Those skills, we are short by the thousands of technical skills as we speak development of this country. Companies are calling me, local companies that work in oil and gas, to supply them the point you're raising, Dr. Das, with welders and fabricators by the dozens, because that is a skill set that is needed a lot in the oil and gas industry. Forklift operators, that's a skill set. We now have to add that as a training, a part of the training in heavy duty equipment operators. We used to just train people to use excavators and the skid steer and the front end loader. Now we have to add forklift operators, because in the oil and gas industry, they're having difficulty finding persons who can operate forklifts. So yes, the government is putting a lot of money. I can say, I can speak from my end, where you have this major deficit of technical skills that are needed, whether in construction or fabricating areas and so. And we are dealing with the matter across the country, most especially in the 4 regions that I've identified. We hope to train by the end of this year several hundred persons. The other issue in the whole conversation is how we bring women into the hard skills training program, because they have been excluded over the decades, because the society created the conditions whereby only this type of job or that type of job or that type of training woman must have. And so I'm arguing the case that the fact that women are majority in the population, we can't exclude them from the necessary technical training that we are rolling out.
Okay, Minister, thank you very much. We are running out of time. We have to get you back because there are so many other issues we want to cover. One final question, and then I pass you on back to the host. If someone from the private sector reports to you that they are not being paid the $60,000 per month, what action is likely to take place there?
Well, the action that will take place is that we will write and summon the company and bring them to the ministry. The law allows the chief labor officer to summon all the books and all the pay sheets and everything of a company. So if they are saying the person is not telling the truth, we can examine that is the chief labor officer is empowered to summon all the documentation regarding the worker or workers in a company. We have done that in many instances to clarify. And then, of course, we mediate between employer and employee and seek to have it conclude. Failure to conclude by employer, then the next step, we take the employer to court before a magistrate who will give the judgment in the interest of the employee.
But before that, do you have a system like you do in health and safety? You'll go and make spot checks to various companies. You have the same arrangement to see if workers are getting a minimum wage. Do you have any?
Yes.
Like
We have. Look, we have increased, just for reference, we have increased from 9 when I got there to the ministry, OSH officers, to 30, to 30 from 9. We have increased from 16 to 26 labor officers. And as I speak to you, in every region except for region 8, we have either 1 or 2 labor office, as I speak to you, staff with officers that belongs to the region. So yes, there are regular interaction, regular checks, as you say, regular training, because one of the of public sector and private sector employers and employees about the law in all respects. So that engagement continue. But once we have a report of any sort of labor breach, whether it has to do with overtime, not honoring the minimum wage, it has to do with the other benefits, leave, and all these issues, we intervene. And we, as I said, last year we were able to recoup over $38 million from employers for employees. This year we have already recouped nearly $14 million.
Okay.
So we have ways, we have methods, how we intervene, and we have been successful in the most part.
Thank you very much, Minister. Very, very great session we have, very enlightening. I am sure a lot of Guyanese, especially in the diaspora, will get a better understanding of the workings of your ministry. But I know there are many other areas we had needed to touch, but we'll have to invite you back on another session. But we want to thank you, and I put you on back to our host to do the final rituals.
Well,
Final rituals.
final rituals it is, Dr. Tara. Thank you so much. First of all, I would like to say, Minister Hamilton, congratulations to you and the women of our country on being trained in the technical jobs. That's an important and a very crucial role for women in our country, and I commend you for doing that. Tonight on the Guyana Dialogue, we have brought to you another important topic that affects our people, and we were able to address issues for labor laws, wages, technical training, and fairness in the job world. Minister Hamilton delivered. He was precise in his message and his delivery of what is lawful and right. I would like to thank both of our speakers for tonight, Dr. Tara Singh and Dr. Gangadas. I would also like to thank our sponsor for tonight, Dave Narayan. To all of our viewers, thank you so much. Continue to share our page and Continue to like our page as well. Until next time, good
Yeah, we
evening to you.
Can we ask
Thank you very much.
Minister Hamilton to make a concluding statement? A
Okay,
short.
let me say thank you very much for having me. And as you said, I am always available to return because we didn't discuss cooperatives. We didn't discuss the central recruitment and manpower, that is placement, job placement issues. We didn't discuss the whole issue that I think Dr. Das spoke around, the statistical review of labor and what is needed in the country. So those are things that I would be grateful that we can, sometime
We will.
come back
We'll
and we discuss them so
we'll
that the public
definitely
can
get
be
you
more informed.
Thank you
And-
very much, sir, and have a pleasant evening and continue with the great works.
Thank you very
Excellency.
much,
Good
gentlemen
evening
and
to
ladies.
everyone.